Well, what's going on, guys? I hate it when I get put into situations where I'm not even sure what the hell to say at this point. Give me one quick second. Sorry about that. I was just checking something out on the local news and also on the local feeds at this point over here. Something that was kind of driving me a little bit batty. When I have controversy coming up concerning about freedom of speech, not to mention the freedom to display a certain flag out there that covers the idea of freedom of speech, even though it is the most rotten, vile form of speech, and celebrating the most rotten, vile form of human behavior. The only thing is, having the First Amendment at times really sucks, I tell you. Now, I said before to a lot of folks, I'm no damn guru. I'm going through college to learn more and more about our political system, our U.S. history. I'm not a guru at anything except being a student of things. And I have lived long enough to know that I don't know anything other than what I've already experienced, and I'm still learning more. So I am not a guru, lettered in anything at this point. It's my own observations, my own opinions, my own theories, my own suppositions. But I'm not putting them as facts, and I'm not shoving it down people's faces, telling them they have to believe in this shit. This is only what I've learned in my lifetime. So, with that being said, compare the gay pride flag to the Confederate flag. You heard me. Shall I repeat that again? The Confederate flag next to the gay pride flag. I've had a fellow poster who decided to educate herself one way or another in what things are, and the thing is, what she's trying to do is post something that's going to be costing her in the long run. And I'm afraid this is going to be biting her in the ass. Now, people are going to be shaking their heads at this one, probably. One of the most controversial things I had to say at this point. Turn that off. I haven't been hip on knowledge concerning about gay pride or anything regarding the lesbian, transgender, gay community of sorts. And yes, I would support the right for someone to have their sexuality be free from everyone else's stigma. If they wanted to be that, they have the right to do so, I would think. I mean, who are we and who am I to judge a person like that, even though if I or may not be comfortable with the idea, personally. I would support the person having the right if they chose to be or live in that kind of world. And I am not saying that we should have that enforced upon anybody else or inflicted upon anybody else, because now I have joined and stepped over to a place where I know I'm going to have my words torn apart, but in the end, it's going to be all torn apart anyway. So let's get the let's get the woodshed ready for it, shall we? Rights to be who and whatever you are, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was built into our Bill of Rights, into our Constitution, into our Declaration to tell one particular country we want our own way of doing things and thinking at this point over here. We would welcome one particular country that was a major component of the 13 colonies, shall we say. And we wanted to keep commercial and business ties with them. However, when it came for taxation without representation, when it came down for military presence, and everything else that the government was said that we're not allowed to have, well, guess what? We said otherwise. And we did. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. And we had to fight a couple of major battles, actually major fighting periods in our American history to guarantee us total breakage and breakup from this country in the hopes of being just a trading partner with them, because we still wanted to be considered part of their world, but we had to consider to be Americans, part of our own, have our own developed heritage. But we still had a lot of faults and a lot of flaws. We weren't considered a perfect country then, nor now. We still considered enslaving people proper. Even England was doing the same damn thing. Even though they weren't. They were trying to be a little bit more discreet about it, but they weren't, really. But we did have more of it in the Americas. It came to a major head in the 1800s when we had arguments concerning about the rights of a human being. What is considered a human being? Who's got the rights to be a human being? And is it regarding a color? Is it a race? Is it a nationality? Is it a creed? Now, we are still trying to decipher that, because we were still the descendants of the European colonists, still under the impression of being a manifest destiny kind of country. Everything was ours. Since we won the country, we won the land, everything is going to be ours. Regardless of the fact that we already had people already living on the damn continent before we got over here in the first place. Native Americans, for one. And we had the European invaders coming in there. Let's see, the Spaniards, we had the French, we had Spanish, French, England came over, Dutch, Germans. Yeah, pretty much Europe came over, carving out their territories left and right, converting the heathens left and right, changing a culture that had been there for generations, for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and almost decimating them down to a mere handful. But we were determined to have our own damn country. Well, keep this in mind as I continue on. We get to a situation where we're trading off states, whether or not one particular state's going to have the right for slavery and another one's not going to have it, just because we wanted to keep it balanced somewhere in our congressional seats in the House of Representatives, and not to mention in the Senate. Who's going to have the electorals? Who's going to have it in the Electoral College of which state is going to be acceptable for slavery and which one's not? Which one's going to have the more political power and more political clout? Get to a point where the southern states are freaking out left and right because they didn't like to see their own way of life changing. Now, if we're going to get politics in here, if we're going to get the political nature in the situation, keep this in mind that we had Republicans and we had Democrats. The Democrats were part of the South. They wanted to keep things the way they were. The same mindset today in the Republican Party, well, before the Trump kicked in. But they wanted to be conservative in every way. That was the Democratic way. The Republicans wanted the country expanded. Everything expanded. They were looking on expansions left and right. We were growing bacteria, weren't we? But even in a conservative way of thinking, we wanted to keep things the way we thought they should have been, including slavery. Thinking a human being wasn't worth much. Because human beings, especially when we keep them as slaves, are money, our wealth, our show of how much we are above everybody else. We looked at it as an economic situation. We didn't look at it as a humanitarian situation. We didn't look at anything else but a money situation. The more slaves you had, the more wealth you had. It's the same frickin' logic they used back in Egypt concerning about when they were enslaving the Israelites. Well, if you want to compare Bible in this situation, might as well. And it took an upheaval and an uprising in Moses' time and a lot of help from above, shall we say, to get the slaves released and to find their own path, even though they kept screwing things up left and right, before they were trying to find their own homelands. To put it loosely, try to put it gently from the stories of the Bible and Exodus. But in this situation, we didn't have that situation. We had a bloody civil war. The states wanted things the way they are. They wanted a slavery. They wanted nothing about the federal government coming down on their ass left and right. For a lot of reasons, apparently. But more so, they kept focusing on the slavery issues than they did concerning about the economic or the political or anything else regarding it. So what was taught in our classes was somewhat of the slavery situation, but really not much in details concerning about why the Civil War happened in the first place, except we had several states wanting to break off from the Union and form their own confederation of sorts. They tried to do that before the Constitution was created. They tried to get the Articles of Confederacy. They tried to have the states independent but loosely connected to each other. The loose connection would be the federal power, but states would have their own ultimate rights of choosing what's good for their area. Not to mention the economics sucked as well, because they would have to have their own money system, and how about having an exchange system going for that? Nightmare. And especially when you needed federal power to regulate the banking industry, and the debt owed because of a Revolutionary War is expensive as hell. War plays havoc on everything, including the economics of a country, a burgeoning, an emerging country that owed debt to Europe because there was a country or two that lent us money and support in arms. And what are we paying back with? We should have helped them out with their liberté, but we didn't. We gave them lip service. They had their own, and they started axing off people's heads left and right. That's part of U.S. history, but it's also world history as well. So now, we're still trying to pay off the debts, and we have states still saying that we have the right to say whatever we want to say, which means we're going to keep our slaves the way they are, and we're going to say screw people. And we're going to have flags showing our separation from the Union. Well, basically, we consider that as illegal as hell, since there hasn't been any amendments written into the Constitution or original draft of the Constitution saying that a state can actually leave the Union. We can get territory drafted into the Union, but when it comes down for territory being separated from the Union, there's nothing in the Constitution regarding this. Even the federal cases up to this point in time, this is 2021, there is no case on record of allowing a state to go its own separate way. Texas had kept doing this damn thing and kept screwing it up left and right because no one bothered to ramrod an amendment into the policy. And if there was, we wouldn't have the federal government, period. we'd be going back to the Confederacy. And the Confederacy couldn't get an act together, especially when it came down for having armies going after each other, brother after brother, relative after relative, friend after friend, all because of idealism, all because of racism, all because they didn't know what the fuck they were fighting for in the first place. Some of them actually did. The rest of us just, who knows? They kept dragging on for 4 years until it was decided. South surrendered. There's a lot of history I'm avoiding at this point over here, but the gist of the thing is, I guess both sides got tired of the damn split, and the South decided to give up. There are reasons, there are explanations out there. I'm not going over them. But even with the surrender of the South, it still didn't change much. Because now we got damage all over the place in the country, more ways than one. We tried to liberate the blacks, but we didn't actually have states really ratify in their own chambers of what freedom was. What was it? Mississippi took over 100 years, well over 100 years, to ratify an act of Congress or to a bill that they actually had to say that they're not going to have any more slavery of any sort in their country. Well over a century and a half, almost two. Holy moly. That's scary as hell. A century and a half. So the representation that we see of it is usually for the Confederate flag is colors loosely based on the Union Jack, except you have the X's with the stars and the X's, and you have the different color platforms here. The red and blue in there, but there were different flags that they were flying other than that. But that flag was mostly used to demonstrate race hatred throughout the centuries, throughout the decades. So that has become as controversial as the figure Adolf Hitler. I hate to throw that one out there, but I'm throwing it out there because a lot of people who are still angry, who still keep up the hatred, who still keep up the idea that there's supposed to be elitism going on, that one particular skin color has to rule over everybody. It's worse than watching this one megalomaniac in the movie of Lord of the Rings trying to make a determination that one ring will rule everybody. One flag, one type of thought. And we're seeing that more and more these days. It's sort of been separating us like a great deal, and it takes a great effort and a lot of sacrifice to possibly pull us back together again. And I don't know any other way to do so. What scares the hell out of me is we have never gone over or completely got the Civil War out of our system. We're still at war with each other. We're at war with each other with our idealism, with our words, with our thoughts, with our feelings, with our actions, with the memes that we keep putting out there that are inflaming people left and right. When they talk about freedom of speech, when they talk about freedom to wave the flag, and also they have the Confederate statues out there, hailed as heroes. Under a First Amendment right, I would say we need to have a museum for all those figures to be displayed and to shown in a context, both sides of a civil war. We need to have a Civil War museum with every museum piece we can find regarding the Civil War, including all those flags, including all those statues, and have it presented to the public and say, this is what it means, and have them show context. It might be debated which particular state. I would think maybe in the southern states, possibly, just to show perspective. We already have museums of tolerance out in New York and also in Los Angeles that show how race hatred works, how separation of religion, of creed, of belief, of sex, how that anger and fear run amok, and what they use to demonstrate it and to justify it. And I had raised points concerning about a court case that I remember watching this on a TV movie. And I had to do a little digging in this damn thing, and it still scared the shit out of me. And I kept thinking about it and the logistics, the legality of it, and then kept thinking, the court case and the Supreme Court ruling was right. Because the freedom of speech is guaranteed for everybody, including those who are angry and want to show their anger as race hatred towards people. And the problem is, we are showing a cancer to people because we consider it as freedom of speech. And this is where I feel the controversy is going to be bringing up here. Because when I start thinking about that kind of logic, that is going to continue to fuel the anger and passion of those who are marching in the streets, burning things down, torturing people left and right because they feel like they are empowered and they have all the right of the government and the freedom of speech and the Constitution to guarantee it. However, when we try to put things into place into our local governments of saying this is illegal, eventually this is going to be coming back to the Supreme Court to make this kind of determination. And they may refer back over to Skokie, Illinois, the court case I was telling you about. Because in this particular town back in the 70s, the American Nazi Party wanted to march through a Jewish neighborhood, a heavily populated Jewish neighborhood. I'm hoping I'm getting the history of this right here. And the town council said, no, you can't do that. This is racism. This is bigotry. We don't want that here. American Nazi Party sued. Now, in the first court case, the American Nazi Party lost. But then they appealed it. And the appeal held. So it went all the way over to the Supreme Court. And during that time, we did have a partial conservative liberal basis in there. And they had to look at the constitutionality of what's been happening here. A group of people, vile and disgusting as they are, was trying to demonstrate their First Amendment rights. Freedom of speech will not be impeded by any government. Who was impeding that particular group of people? The local government. It was ruled in the Supreme Court, and you can research this, and you can find this out there, that Skokie, Illinois lost the case, and the American Nazi Party at the time won. But there was a caveat on this one. They didn't put it into the ruling. They just said that the American Nazi Party had a right for freedom of speech. But they only work with the constitutional ideas and idealism of what the Constitution says and what it generally means. But nothing specific on how or when or where? And that was up to the local government to decide. Well, they were entitled to march, to spew their race hatred all over the place, but only at a place designated at a certain time, and if they actually had authorization and the correct paperwork. You catching the point? You have a group of racists who want to say that they're going to spread their word around. Fine. The government can't stop you. Doesn't say nobody else can. Doesn't say that there won't be any counter protesters either. It cannot be stopped by the government unless we're talking about something very unruly here. If we're going to be burning down places left and right, then it becomes an unruly situation. If we're going to be destroying monuments or destroying building or doing some destruction, then the government's got a way of standing into it, because now you're being a very destructive entity at this point over here, and that's not guaranteed. Destruction is not guaranteed as a freedom of speech. However, it was also ruled in the U.S. Supreme Court that the destruction of the United States flag burned in protest using as a way of a political statement is allowed, despite the fact what the U.S. Code says otherwise. SCOTUS countermounted that one, so they had to have the U.S. Code modified on that one regarding flag burning. Speaking back to flags, the Confederate flag is theoretically guaranteed a freedom of speech under SCOTUS. But it's up to the local municipalities, and it's also up to the people to decide whether or not they want that damn thing flying or not. And they have the right to decide whether or not it stays out there or not. Now, people might say that the gay flag, might as well call it a gay pride flag. There's a lot of other proper terminology for it. It should be. So the rainbow flag is a way of expressing to people that there is a certain group out there, a community, a large community, that wants to demonstrate their viewpoints and say that we should exist. We have the right to exist. We have the right to say whatever we want to say at this point over here, because the federal government allows us to do so. However, as I said before, it cannot be prevented by the federal government unless we've already got a Supreme Court saying at this point over here that there are certain groups are going to be allowed and not allowed, because they're going to have to argue the First Amendment rights at this point over here. So currently, they are allowed to display the gay flag, and not to mention the Confederate flag as well, because of the Supreme Court rulings, and because there has been no laws on the record to say otherwise, at least nothing under the federal. State may say something else, but the state is going to have to go against the federal government at this point over here because of First Amendment rights. And this is what I have to keep getting myself educated more and more on, because I have to be well aware of what our rights are supposed to be, what are presumed to be, and what actually are. Because it affects you, it affects me, it affects everybody. Regarding the Facebook posting, this is going to be a different tricky situation over here now. Now, I've been trying to talk about the federal government at this point over here, but there's also another thing. United States versus citizen. Actually, and this happens to deal with a law that passed back in the 90s concerning about electioneering. How major corporations have put in lots of mega money into politicians' pockets and political groups to get their own way and say. The law, well, let's just say that the situation was put through the Supreme Court rulings at this point, and they've got major rulings on this one. This was a hell of a long battle that the companies had, and it was determined that the companies would be considered as individual entities, not as a corporation. If they were a corporation, they would be considered as governed under the federal government and therefore regulated left and right. But somehow, under a conservative court system, because of the electioneering laws and the arguments going through saying that the corporation should be considered as a private entity and they can donate to whoever the hell they want. They are individuals. They should be considered individuals. So if they are considered individuals, they'll be well aware and well beyond federal limitations. But they don't even realize that this is going to have a nationwide and decades-long change in how the U.S. government views corporations and companies and how they run and how they operate. We're already seeing that happening in our lifetime right now. That the Congress has been seeing a lot of special committees going on, a lot of special hearings regarding the social media companies out there, whether or not they should be regulated or not. And there's nothing in the books that can actually get them under that unless Congress makes laws to say so in the first place. And if it is challenged in the Supreme Court, as much as I'm understanding about the law at this point over here, and I really need to get into the law at this point over here to argue about this. Because as far as I understand it, as his little junior assistant does, it would have to be determined that the companies would have to be considered or reconsidered as corporations and no longer an individual, and therefore be subject to regulations of the government. That includes every company out there, major corporations down to the smaller guys. Now, a lot of politicians wanted to keep the federal government out, wanted the companies to thrive. They want to make their money left and right. They don't want to have the federal regulations. They don't want to have the federal government on their ass left and right. And therefore, including social media, will have their way and have their own guidelines of what people can say and what they can't say. Now, if you're confused about the whole situation, imagine throughout the decades, the lawyers are still trying to figure this one out, even with the social media. Because with the advent of the internet going on since the 90s through right now, they're still scratching their heads of what's allowed and what's not allowed. Simply put, Facebook is one of those major corporations. Excuse me one quick second here. Sorry, I didn't want to blast out your eardrums. That guy had to sneeze somehow, so. Facebook has the right to say what you're allowed, what you're not allowed. Just by agreeing and clicking on the OK, by giving them authorization, they give you a semblance of freedom to say things up to a certain point. Beyond their point, beyond their own guidelines, is open season. We're dealing with flags that are controversial right now, even as we speak. A Confederate flag next to a gay flag. And somebody's wondering, what's the problem with this picture? What's the problem with this picture is, One represents racial hatred, and the other one is getting dumped on by hatred left and right. One is considered racial hatred, but it is still protected under a federal law as freedom of speech. Actually, both of them. However, because Facebook is still considered as a private entity, as a person per se, they are allowed to say what is allowed and what is not allowed. Think about that one. I rambled on because I wanted to make a point clear. It doesn't matter what my personal opinion is regarding the situation. What you have to abide by is a community standard set up by the federal court system, set up by the U.S. Congress, set up by precedents and legalities, a lot of sort of fun stuff to throw at you. You don't like it, that's your opinion. If you support it, that's also your opinion. But keep this in mind, you're going to be open season for a lot of comments coming back at you one way or another. This is why I call them Pandora boxes, because you never know. Excuse me one second. I gotta get my hair cleaned off. This is one of those times where you have to understand that whatever you open up, you're going to allow both a lot of ugliness to come out while trying to keep the rest of the good stuff inside. But if you happen to blast that box open, you're going to be blasted by all sides, by a lot of comments, by a lot of attitudes at this point over here, because you decided to cross that particular line. You opened up that particular box. So I would suggest, when you're in a field of Pandora boxes, tread carefully, please. You never know what certain words or certain phrases or certain actions may take that'll flag you one way or another. I know, because I'm seeing it happen too many times with too many people ending up in a quote-unquote Facebook jail these days. Or social media hell. Or getting kicked off left and right. So choose your battles and choose your words and your conversations very carefully. You don't know if I might be monitoring you at this time. And with that, I bid you a good day and a good night.